Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is the July edition of AI Pulse. And if you didn't catch last month's AI Pulse, that was the first one. So you might not have caught us and understood the format yet, but format is Tom Pringle joining me from Pilot Research, and he's going to co-host, and then we shall discuss a whole bunch of really interesting news and be a little bit curmudgeonly about some of it, I'm sure, and just talk a little bit about AI and automation and see kind of what's going on in the world. So welcome.
It sounds good, and I think you should immediately retract the fact that you said that we might be occasionally cynical. Analysts are never cynical.
Never. Yeah, and we also don't like to hear ourselves talk. I'm just saying. Well, so where to start? We were talking before the show a little bit about this OpenAI announcement. So why don't we start there? Because I think this is really interesting, and it kind of leads into some of the other news that we had. Yeah. So I don't know if you saw this when it came out, but I sent you the article, so of course you know what it is. But this idea that OpenAI made an announcement this week. They said, and it was a leaked document to Bloomberg, so I don't know if it was supposed to be public or not, but I guess it doesn't really matter. It's public now. That they had defined 5 levels of AI, and that they had reached what they were saying was level 2, which was reasoner, human level problem solving. Now, to get, I guess, for context for people listening or watching, I could have put this on a slide, but I didn't. The 5 levels, the 5 levels are chatbots, AI with conversational language, reasoners, human level problem solving, agents, systems that can take action, innovators, AI that can aid in invention, and then lastly, organizations, AI that can do the work of an organization. Now, this is not some officially approved hierarchy that I know of, but I'm curious what you think about that, Tom.
I think it's really interesting, and I did see the article you sent over. And my story is this is the continuation of a theme, right? Which is helping people, informing people with intelligence, making suggestions, kind of getting them beyond that into this kind of role of agents and taking action. So kind of data and suggestions are interesting, but perhaps kind of the automation of some of the work is the next step. I say logically it's the next step. I'm not quite sure I understand the organization level, to be fair, unless we're talking about the automation of the entire organization. But like you say, I mean, this document, who knows? It's out in the public now, but I haven't seen all the definition. For me, and it's interesting. I think you ask 100 people what AI is, and you'll probably get definitely 50 and probably closer to the 75 different answers.
Yeah, most likely.
So I think it's as good a way as any about talking, a framework for talking about the different levels of, really it boils down to capability, doesn't it? So, what can this thing do, as opposed to, and for me, that's, it was a great conversation. I was joining a briefing recently, and I said, people don't, in this particular context, not so worried about technology, they're very concerned about what it can do, and sort of talked about hamsters on treadmills. It could be that. Obviously, not necessarily the case, but I think that does reflect well and characterizes it well. Most people kind of care about the output.
Yeah, I published a report this week. A little plug for my report here on the decision intelligence, and I started working on this a while ago, and it was kind of an evolution of thought because I originally was thinking about it more from the idea that using AI, generative AI tools, we're starting to get to the point where we can really provide a decision intelligence kind of assistant or assist to humans. And over time, I realized that the real value was not that piece of it, although that's an important piece. But there's really sort of 3 pieces of the way this works. And one of them, the really obvious one's fully automated. And that's actually the biggest block of the things that you want to have done when you implement it, is you want to automate as much as you can. And then you have this class of decision that is, I called it human oversight. So it's not human in the loop, like humans not doing something. They're just observing and taking action if it does something untoward, and you have to stop it. And then lastly is human in the loop, or human led, whatever you want to call it. And after I got those buckets down, it made a lot more sense to me. So I understand that from the different levels that you're talking about, organizations, and it can do the work of an organization. I don't know exactly what that means, but I do get that there is a large part of automation that's starting to grow in capability that could be really beneficial to organizations. So I think it tied in that way. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I guess that's what they mean. I'm not sure. Or maybe they just mean AGI and it does everything. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Although let's have fun trying to define AGI. So, yeah, no, I completely agree. It's interesting. That human in the loop conversation's been around for a good long while. Yeah. In fact, years. And it's interesting, isn't it? There's never anything new, and there's lots of new things all at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you've got decision intelligence. And I remember, you think about sort of management information systems and decision support,
executive systems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think it's it kind of boils down to one of my favorite lines, which is it's kind of the science fiction problem, right? Which is the principles might be completely solid, but the technology wasn't there at the time to kind of make it real.
Yeah, it is sort of BPM that grew up, and now all this, and on RPA too, right? So you sort of combine those, and then you add this generative AI capability, and then you add the capability that they call agents, systems that can take actions. You add all those things together, and you start to come up with something that is hugely valuable. But it was really not possible until the last few years.
Yeah, and I'd be really interested. I think one of the kind of the interesting things is around the processes, the business processes themselves, right? So how many companies, this is a genuine question, and I can take a stab at the answer, I genuinely don't know. How many companies actually have all their processes properly documented in a way which makes kind of human readable sense?
Yeah.
Probably not so many. And I start to see, I'd be really curious to see how it pans out, because there's put my old consulting hat on, there's probably quite a lot of consulting work in this. For people as they start to kind of combine these technologies for a more complete automation.
Well, and you start to see, I could see the capabilities, and I've looked at several of these solutions in detail. So I started to understand where we're going with this, and I think it's really powerful. There's obviously some, this idea of these levels, chatbots we've known about, right? I mean, AI conversational interaction, good, that's fine. But then you get to reasoners and agents. I'm not sure I can figure out the the need for distinction there, but I guess there is some capability of problem solving without taking action, and then there's taking action without problem solving. But if you put the two together, that seems like the logical place to go for me. But I don't know what
innovation. No, I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's the natural progression. I think it's interesting. There's that great quote that I apologize because I can't give credit to the person who actually wrote it. Because I can't remember. We can always correct that in the comments. Which was, I want AI to kind of do all the dull work for me, and I want to be left to do all the creative things, right? Whereas what we're seeing quite a lot of, and on this list, of course, we've got innovators, is AI being used for some of those creative things. So rather than kind of automating away some of the dull, repetitive stuff, I develop a concern, question, a cynicism. You decide. When it comes to people talking about inventing things, and look, it's not. I think it's perfectly fair to question it. You can scenario out really positive outcomes where it invents new medications or something like that that genuinely bring serious human benefit. You can also imagine other ones where it possibly isn't quite so positive.
I mean, yes, I don't disagree that is those scenarios are they can be very dark or they can be very light. And innovation. I mean, you're already starting to see in certain areas if you apply the this to a problem like
Yeah.
the environment or to pharma or there's areas where you're already getting significant um, progress from that combination of human machine. So it's a collaboration right now, but I mean it is providing some significant benefit in vaccines and treatments and those kinds of things. So I mean I think it's interesting to it. So this actually kind of leads me to a second announcement, and
Yeah.
I'll combine these, and I think you'll get my point here. I was thinking about this earlier, and actually I should say I was looking at my site traffic this week, just going like, okay, I wonder what are people searching for on my blog, what's hot, and I was a little surprised because I wrote a while ago, I don't maybe the end of last year or early this year anyway, an article that was beyond large language models, talking about large action models, which is related to. I first started digging into that because I'd gotten the little Rabbit AI device, which is built on a large action model. And the concept's pretty simple, right? It's back to this agent thing. It can do things for you versus just create content, which is kind of the next level there, I think. And I don't know if you saw, but this week, Salesforce announced the beta of their Einstein Service Agent. So they have added AI agents into Service Cloud that will that will either interact or take some action for you. So it does seem like that is a place where we're moving.
Yeah. You're going to find no lack of agreement from me. I think it's really interesting you mentioned Salesforce as well. My story has been fairly consistent on this one. I think, just get your view, see whether you're aligned. I think baking in these capabilities into the tools that people already use is the way to drive not just adoption, but also to actually start seeing some of these productivity improvements and returns everyone keeps talking about. And I think, kind of that ability to take some action, look, who knows what it is, maybe it's updating a ticket that's been raised in Service Cloud or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge time saver potentially, and has all the context of the organization's data as well to work with. So it's not just sort of going off and looking at a big language model. It's also, kind of using the customer's own data to help inform any action it might take. It's my understanding anyway.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and it's because of the architecture. They protect the data. They built this trust layer. They did, I mean, things we've talked about before. But the point is that you can trust that your data is not leaking into the model, but you do have model access and your data, the combination of those with the APIs to do something, which is also what I learned in the decision intelligence world. The connections are extremely important here because you're trying to do a process and execute something, and so you have agents that are doing that, and you're connecting those to your existing system so that it can actually take that action, whatever it might be. I mean, one simple example: you apply for a credit card, and it'll give you an answer in 30 seconds or less. Well, that's because it's going through, running an algorithm. It scores. It knows if it hits this level, it's approved. If it's below this level, it is either not approved or it could be a escalation. So it'll pop it into the human observer, who then does take. So it's that's a systematic way to think about the way that automation works. And I think, and to me, that makes that I like that flow. That makes sense to me because it could be automated, but there are exceptions to the automation.
Yeah, of course, and it's interesting. It kind of leads to another thought, and I don't think there's any easy answer to this one either. When you think about kind of the tech stacks of lots of companies out there, they are often very complicated, and that's probably a significant understatement. Whether that's just a whole bunch of software as a service vendors, point solutions for different capabilities, or whether it's something like a legacy banking platform that's kind of running on a mainframe, right? And it's interesting. I can't decide whether these kind of systems being layered on top help resolve that complexity, or just disguise it. Because simplicity for me, it's kind of a key principle. When you think about those kind of the complex systems and how reliant we are on them, does it get to the point as we automate that we don't actually know what's going on underneath?
I mean, that's the case already in some cases. I hate to say it, but there are parts of AI research that exists today where people are going like, yeah, I don't really know exactly how it did that, but it does it consistently. So I mean, it makes me nervous. I mean, I guess, but at the same time, we're all rushing down this front, and I don't know. I'm a little more. I mean, I not that we don't need to pay attention, but I may be a little more towards we've got to experiment some and break some things. Now let's hope we don't break a big thing like a big round earthy looking thing, but nonetheless, I think there is something there. But this kind of leads me to an article you sent me that I wanted to add in, and it kind of ties into this discussion from 2 points of view. One was this idea that NVIDIA now is more valuable than Microsoft in market cap, which happened, I guess, this week or last week, maybe. A couple weeks ago, and so NVIDIA continues to grow, but is it? Are we reaching some apex there? Is it a bubble? Are we? There's all this underlying discussion, and I've seen a couple of really good discussions this week on. Is this an internet bubble, internet-like bubble, or is this not? And some interesting arguments on both sides of that. I know where I stand, but I'm curious what you think. How would you approach that?
So ask an easy question.
Not a big question, just,
Totally, no. It's really interesting because, and I think, there's definitely the excitement around AI, which has driven engagement. I think NVIDIA has some really cool technology. I'm not a specialist in the hardware side of things, other than being a PC gamer and using an NVIDIA card for the graphics on that. But, they've clearly positioned themselves exceptionally well.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of peaked expectation about what can be done. And I always think, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I mentioned things like productivity returns and return on investment. And this may be a cynical point, but I think it's fairly fair. Until companies start seeing hard numbers that say this is doing this for us. Yeah. This is returning this value to us, our people, our shareholders, our stakeholders, whoever. I think that is a challenge. We'll see. I honestly, I'm not a finance guy, right? But that's some big numbers out there.
I mean, there are some very big numbers out there, and I mean this article that I read this week about the CEO of Anthropic, who was talking, to a reporter and talking about the what it costs to train a model, and this kind of ties into this too, right? It takes about $100 million to train AI at the lower end of the spectrum, and he said some models they're training today could cost more like $1 billion to train, and he thinks that current prices will be considered the low end compared to what it's going to cost to develop competitive AI in the future. And his exact quote was, I think if we go to 10 to 100 billion, and I think that will happen by 2025, 26, or maybe 27, then I think there's a good chance that by that time we'll be able to get models that are better than most humans at most things.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? 'Cause it's kind of, in some ways, counterintuitive. Given that normally things start expensive, and as more people use them and do it, they get cheaper. So I think from that perspective, and look, those numbers don't shock or surprise me, given you think about sort of the amount of money and the scale of some of the people building this technology. What does worry me, I suppose, is that we end up with literally only a handful of companies who are able to make those sorts of investments. Which would be a big red flag for me personally. And I'll be really interested, because I once sat in a meeting, we're talking about how long can you see into the future about technology. Of course, the answer is no one's knows. There's all sorts of different ways of talking about it. And we talked about market forecasts and say, well, we tend to forecast out 5 years. And I thought to myself, yeah, it's interesting that because, from today to 5 years from now, will be really interesting to see what, if anything, fundamentally changes that breaks that expectation around the kind of the cost of model training and productionization, because it doesn't personally feel sustainable.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that, and this ties a little bit back to the bubble question maybe too, but there are a couple of things there. Like we're very good at improving technology's performance over time, right? Exponentially improving. And so when you talk about NVIDIA and what they're doing, it is, obviously they were in the right place at the right time, and they've certainly benefited greatly from that. Their shareholders have benefited greatly. Is that going to be the only way that we run AI in the future? I doubt. But I don't know what the answer is yet. But that's the point, right? Is as we exponentially improve things over time. Now, maybe the cost does continue to go up to train the model, but maybe there are some alternatives from a compute perspective that changes that dynamic. Who knows for sure, right? But it is interesting to think that and actually this maybe ties into another article that I read that I thought was interesting. But the idea of continuing to train these models on available data. And how much available data is there? And we used to think we're producing data at such a rate that we'll never be, saying we need more data. But the truth is, we're getting to a point where we need more data. We're starting to use synthetic data to train models because we can't get some data in certain places and about certain things. And then, of course, you're starting to see all these lawsuits pop up that are related, that are, people want to be paid for their content if you're training on our stuff. And New York Times was the first one, but there's a whole bunch of others that have joined in, right? Suing for copyright infringement. What was the company? The company that produces Mother Jones magazine, I guess, is suing, and there's a couple of others. It's a growing trend, and so we're going to have to figure that out. And I don't know how to figure the copyright end of it out, but at the same time, it is kind of it's a growing ecosystem there, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think the one thing you mentioned there, and it's sort of sometimes sit back and think about this because I like being a bit techno philosophical, I suppose, which is you think kind of cast your mind back to early 2000s. What people were saying about hardware back then was it's all about becoming commodity and being able to run across highly, scale out solutions became kind of the word, and it was all doesn't matter what you wanted fast chips and fast memory and performance, kind of capability, but it was all about commodity. And what we've seen is kind of the reverse of that kicking in again, and we're seeing sort of specialized chips for AI, specialized chips for this, that, and the other. There'll be different server use cases versus, what we use at home or our personal devices. But I'll be curious to see kind of how that pans out because, to the point earlier, maybe another technology does arrive. Maybe, and here's the real wild card, right? So everyone always says that quantum's about 10 to 20 years away. Whenever anyone asks, even if it's 10 to 20 years away, it's still 10 to 20 years away. I don't know. I could go, I don't know about quantum computing on the level of where it is from a research perspective. But I do think it's interesting. I think one big change like that, a complete paradigm change in terms of the compute, might fundamentally change this conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that actually is exactly my point, that things change in ways that we don't predict. And I mean, honestly, you think about, you're right, that whole end of the bubble, internet bubble and all that time was really commoditization of hardware. And then we went to cloud computing. And so it's just a utility. We're just going to consume it in in the cloud. And then, of course, somebody, and mostly likely an accountant, went, hey, wait a minute. This is really expensive if you use a lot of it. I don't know if you noticed. So, I mean, now we have all these conversations going about it. And actually, even in the world of, and by the way, I should have agreed with you earlier. I completely agree that the way this adoption happens in the enterprise is by embedding across all these different processes. And I think that's absolutely true. You know, that is the change we're gonna see. But the interesting model. So we're having a lot of packaging pricing issues, and maybe we even talked about this in the last episode because it's something that comes up a lot about utility-based pricing or usage-based pricing or tokenization, all these different kind of how do you monetize some of these things. Well, there are three that I know of vendors that are notable for not charging for adding in AI capabilities into their applications.
Yeah.
And once I tell you who they are, you'll know why. Oracle, Zoho, and Zoom. They all three don't charge for their AI. No usage-based pricing, no tokens, nothing. It's just included. And of course, if you know anything about those three vendors, they own their own stack completely. They don't consume cloud computing resources from any other vendor. They only consume their own cloud computing resources. They have their own data centers. They have their own infrastructure. And that changes the economics quite a bit when it goes in that direction.
No, indeed. I mean, I use Google Workspace, and I pay separately for the AI capability on top of that. It was interesting, given that they do own quite a lot of their own stuff too. But I think that's we're touching on the topic, and we did talk about it a little bit last time around. I think that kind of having it baked into the everyday is the way it kind of gets a decent return. I suppose the counterpoint argument would be people, like talk about it in terms of, well, maybe our AI solution is better and it needs to be at a premium. Maybe it contains a solution that was trained on a proprietary data set. Or an industry-specific data set. So I suppose, kind of like in the same way that you can have horizontal solutions, sometimes you get these industrial solutions up on top, and they are at a premium because they contain more IP. I wonder whether there's an argument there. But as you say, I mean, as much as I love the integration and putting it into stuff point, it'd be interesting to see, because I think I don't think there's one answer to rule them all.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely not one answer to it. You're right. And I think it's going to, I mentioned to you that I was playing around with the small language model locally. And I think this is more and more you're going to see companies doing this, right? That they're going to go, I need a specialty thing, and I'm going to use one of these open source models and train it to do this specialty thing. And I think that more and more you'll see those kinds of applications. And from a company perspective, companies are willing to invest in something that has unique value that offers them some competitive advantage. So that's always been the case with technology, right? And so, I think that verticalization and industry and function and all those different ways you could make them specific, that is a huge opportunity, I think, because that is certainly an area you're going to see expand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in the same way that we've seen markets develop for models, I think that will be a thing that continues to expand considerably. And I'll use the very well-worn phrase that we are so fond of using in the world of technology or IT, so the 80-20 rule, right? So, kind of the mechanics of this are 80% the same across multiple business types. It's kind of a similar type of process. Then that 20% might be your specific data. We talked about context earlier. It might be that your process has particular quirks. But I think it's interesting. I think, and maybe there's a divergence, right? So maybe that something, back to this point about very big language models taking huge resources to create. Maybe we just see this divergence in these mega models over here somewhere, which are more of the what we might call artificial general intelligence type, kind of aim focus, thing. And then you've got all of these more smaller, localized, specific models, which are very much around, improvements in business process and therefore productivity.
Yeah, I mean that is a reasonable way to think of it. So I keep hearing this argument, and this is such a typical tech analysty argument. Well, a tech people argument that we're in a bubble, or we're not in a bubble. Oh, it's we're to, the Gartner hype cycle. So we're at the right before the trough of disillusion. They call that thing. But it's I first of all, I don't think we're in a bubble. I'll say that very clearly. I don't think this is a bubble. I think this is the next platform shift. And because I think it's the next platform shift, do I think that there's like I read an article last night that was talking about some companies are having problems deploying their pilot projects with AI. But you know what? It's not the technology's problem. Almost always when you look at that and get detail around it, it's a data problem, not the technology. So there opportunity to, there's a whole big opportunity for somebody to go out and help companies fix their data problem because they had a bad, a mess of data for so long that, that'll always be the nagging part until we get past that or come up with some better way to do it or, whatever. But at the same time, there's a ton of value already, and there's more and more value that we can get out of this as we start to apply these things and have the capabilities to do more. And the Salesforce, AI agent beta in Service Cloud, to me, that's a very logical one, right? I want agents that can help me do certain things to make the agent experience better and the customer experience even better. Mm-hmm. And that's a logical way to think of it. And so there's good value there. So personally, I don't think it's a bubble. I wouldn't call it a bubble. Do I think there's some overexcitement about certain things? Well, I mean, there's overexcitement about lots of things. I don't know, but I do think there's good value there. We just got to get past this data problem and get into real production with some of these things and start to develop the ROI, because there is big return there. I mean, the decision automation piece in itself is hugely valuable. If I don't have to do all those routine decisions, my people can focus on things that are much more human necessary, like things that require empathy and sympathy and emotions.
Those things that we like to express as humans. Hopefully, anyway. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've, and I forgive me if I'm repeating myself. I'm definitely, certainly sure I've said it to you in the past. It may have been on our last conversation, which is, so the old phrase is garbage in, garbage out. We used to talk about in BI and analytics, right? Yep. And I say, I wrote a piece quite recently. I said with AI, the garbage in problem becomes a toxic waste out problem potentially. Because of the scale of it and the potential reach of its output. But it's interesting you mentioned Salesforce again there, and I think the same could be said of some other companies. Their launch of the data cloud seems extremely well timed. We all know there's various statistics. Google for yourself or prompt your favorite model. But we know people talk about dark data. And the number of organizations have these vast repositories of information, data, and it might be it's in an unstructured format. It might be, right. You could even go to take this to kind of slightly ridiculous levels. It might be on tape and offline. Who knows? Is that data relevant? I don't know, but it might be. But even just the day-to-day stuff, right? A lot of it's just not available, and getting that available to people. And to help these machines help us make better decisions is kind of really key.
Yeah, and I mean the data cloud move was great, and they've been working on that for a little while. And of course, they had that was the evolution of CDP. And then I was at I spoke at a Twilio event not long ago, and I was learning a little bit about their kind of revising their strategy, and they have very unique assets. And this hit me in the middle of what they were showing is that their CDP segment is is one of the most popular CDPs around, but of course it had mostly been focused around marketing, like all the CDPs had. And if you start to expand that though, and you start to think of it just like Salesforce did with the data cloud, you start to think of it more like a data cloud that spans, the whole enterprise, then there's an interesting combination with Twilio because they also have this communication infrastructure. So they own the data from all the customer interactions as well. So if you can put that in real time into your data model, information model, there are infinitely more things you can get to do once you have added in that additional data stream when it comes to dealing with customers. So there's a lot of logic if you start to provide tools that can help companies solve that data problem, but it's going to take more effort than just the tool. It takes an awful lot of effort inside the businesses to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed on the head. It's the last point that I wanted to make on the subject. It just comes up over and again. It's I don't know. It's either been a consistent friend or a haunting nightmare. I don't know, whichever. Which is, kind of, you say data quality and people don't get very excited as a general rule, in spite of the fact that, kind of data quality is rather important. And that's a bit of an understatement. So if I'm looking at my banking app and it says I've got £10 million in my account, I assure you I do not have £10 million in my account. I might be quite upset about that. Or if it told me I was massively overdrawn and I knew I wasn't. So data quality there is a nice simple example. You kind of get into these bigger conversations. People get often very excited about the headline of some of these projects, and AI is just the obvious one at the moment. Yeah. But they typically don't tend to get as excited about the underlying. It's not just the plumbing to get the data accessible. It's also to make sure the data's correct, right, appropriately. Right.
Yeah, and you're starting to see some tools evolve around that. I mean, Informatica's some offerings, NetApp. So you're starting to see some of these infrastructure plays that are going to help, and even just the idea that you can use federated data in Data Cloud or Segment, some of the other CDP type products. So what do I mean? I mean, you can leave the data where it is and have access to it anyway, which is, sounds simple, but it's not so simple. But it is a huge way to take a step forward inside your business without having to move everything into one big data lake, which is a problem, or at least it's not easy.
Definitely not easy, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so let me take a different article, or a little different take in the discussion, because I found really, really interesting this week. I was looking at this stats on different VC investments. Yep. And I suppose I should congratulate you, UK people, because you are spending a lot of money funding AI startups these days.
Yeah, I mean, it was big news, really. I think and for my money, somewhat didn't get the attention it ought to. So we always think of the US being kind of the biggest market for venture capital, obviously, for reasons I don't think anyone watching this would need particularly explaining. Right. But it's funny because the UK turns out is number 2. And they're big numbers. We're talking multi-billion-dollar numbers.
Big numbers, yeah.
Which is hugely pleasing. I mean, obviously I'm British, so I'm a bit biased. But it's nice to see kind of that homegrown innovation happening. And, I wasn't smart enough to go to Oxford or Cambridge, but we've got these kind of fancy universities that have global reputations. And we know particularly, look at some of the work that's come out of those, and it starts to kind of make sense to a degree. I just think it's hugely encouraging seeing that. Join us. And talking of joining us, by the way, apologies. Here's my dog that's also come to
Nice.
I'm not
Mine's asleep, so at least we're.
I'm not sure he's got strong views about AI. I think he's got strong views about dinner time.
Well, I mean, probably nothing artificial, but anyway. The numbers that I saw here, though, and just to add one more bit to this, 1/3 of all European venture capital tech funding went to the UK.
Yeah.
In 2024 so far. So London and Cambridge, huge growth. I mean, 83% increase in venture capital investments in Cambridge. I mean, that's a big number.
Yeah,
Big number.
it's absolutely huge, and I think it's really interesting. I think kind of seeing. Look, I get excited about technology. And kind of from an innovation perspective, seeing some of these things get progressed out. It doesn't have to be even AI. It can be so many different areas. We mentioned quantum computing earlier. There's a big focus in that space. There's a big focus around, I forgot the name of it. Doesn't matter. But kind of fundamentally, we're talking about really interesting development that might end up representing that change we talked about earlier, that fundamental shift that powers a different conversation. Conversation about AI.
Conversational AI? Oh, no, wait.
Sorry. It was. I said it. It sounded terrible. I thought it sounded terrible.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think it's really shows a lot of momentum in that market, and I think that's a really interesting place. And I mean, if you had asked me, what are the where are the countries spending the most on VC funding new AI startups, I probably wouldn't have put UK as number 2, but I obviously stand corrected because that is significant. So we getting close to the end of time, but or the end of time for the show, I should say. I don't want to scare anybody.
Well, I hope it's not the end.
The end of time. Oh, that's a little scary. Anyway, but I wanted to my sort of tech innovation of the month. I wanted to bring up and just see what you think about this, because I read this article that I love the idea. And we've been talking about data centers for a while. Where should we put them? How should we? And they've looked at putting them in the ocean, and apparently the latest big push is putting them in space. Which, I mean, the ocean makes some sense because you get cooling from the water, but then there is that whole electricity water problem. But then if you put data centers, I mean, that's an issue.
Probably really bad for the ecosystem. Yeah,
well, it probably is, right? I mean, we already have global warming. We don't want to use the seawater to cool things that are going to make it hotter, because that's Anyway, putting them in space, though, I mean, that is a really interesting idea, because certainly from a cooling perspective, I mean, you don't have to worry about that. And I guess it says they could be far more energy efficient. I mean, I suppose you've got really good access to solar. So
all the power issues solved. I would ask some serious questions about the cost of putting that much tonnage into space. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned science fiction before. We need one of those space elevators. And they remember the Foundation book, Asimov, So we clearly need some sort of space elevator to make it realistic. So I'm not sure that burning tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of gallons of gas to launch rockets with data center components.
Yeah, it might actually. Yeah, you might need some other way to get the techs up there, or keep them up there, I guess, because you could. I guess.
But then I suppose there's probably the counter. I mean, since we're going off the tracks of what's possible today. Maybe we don't ship it up into space. We build it on the moon with stuff that's on the moon.
I mean, it's definitely cooler there too. I don't know.
Well, this is certainly true. But no, I think joking aside, I think the kind of the data center problem and the impact that they're having in terms of power demand, the impact they have on the environment, in terms of kind of the cooling requirement. Yeah. And generally speaking, kind of they have to be secure for reasons that are obvious. I think it's something that we're probably not talking enough about, because but it's interesting, isn't it? Because the comeback, and I'm sure you'll like this one. The comeback is maybe we build enough data centers, they'll solve the climate change problem. Yeah, I guess you could make that argument.
I mean. The thing is, like, we know that we're going to have to, there have to be some better solutions to what's happening right now. And I told you when I put this little language model on my MacBook, I wasn't plugged in at the time, and I was building this little thing out, putting the chat interface on it. And all of a sudden I looked up at my power percentage meter, and it was clicking down. I could see it click down in percentage. I mean, just putting the language model and operating it on my MacBook, it just ate the battery in no time. Like I was amazed. So I now have in real life seen that it takes a lot of power to do this.
Yeah, indeed. And I don't want to come across as too cynical. As fun and enthusiastic as I can be engaged on AI, kind of there's always a joke that the internet was sort of full of kitten pictures or cat pictures and memes and stuff like that. I wonder what percentage of the use of these massive models is actually useful.
I guess we'll leave that one for the audience, because I don't know either. But I mean, I see lots of things that are certainly interesting and lots of use cases that are interesting, but it's just your everyday use of the thing. I mean, are they asking for recipes for pasta, or like, I don't know.
I would always say that's useful, right? I mean,
that's useful. Yeah, don't get me wrong.
But I mean, is it is having a generative tool develop a kind of a background for your meetings on like Zoom or Google Meet or whatever? Is that a great use of compute resource? I don't know.
I mean, it's handy for me. I certainly like it when I can go, okay, what is this meeting about? Because we made this appointment like 3 months ago, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to talk about. I mean, not that I do that, but I'm sure people do that.
That never happens. Meetings are always super valuable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I mean, they are valuable, but me remembering what they are is another conversation, I guess.
Oh, that's also fun.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyway, so that's all the time we have today, Tom. But that's fun. I mean, I love doing this, and I think we're going to make this a regular. People can check this out mid-month. Every month, we're going to put an AI Pulse episode out, and just do this kind of chat about all the interesting things that are happening each month in AI. And there's certainly a lot of interesting things happening. So it's not like we're going to run out of things to talk about, I guess.
No, I strongly suspect we will have a surplus like we did this time.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so that's all the time we have today. I'm Michael Fawcett.
And I'm Todd Pringle.
Thank you for joining us for this month's AI Pulse, and we'll see you next month. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform to help others find the show. For more on AI and other software research reports, briefs, and blog posts, check out arionresearch.com. If you have AI, generative AI, or business automation expertise, either as a provider or as an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com, and we'll see if we can get you on as a guest. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.